What if the most dangerous thing that could happen to an ancient human wasn't a predator? It was silence. Let that sink in. Imagine this: an ancient hunter, tracking prey deeper into the forest than usual, focused, determined, chasing a trail that keeps leading further from camp. And then, the trail disappears. So does the sun's position overhead. So does every familiar landmark. Think about this. In seconds, a confident hunter becomes something else entirely. Lost. Alone. And in the ancient world, being alone was never safe. The first thing that happens isn't physical. It's psychological. Panic. Let that sink in. The human mind, when lost, doesn't stay calm by default. Heart rate spikes. Breathing quickens. The urge to run, to move, to do something becomes almost impossible to resist. But wait. Movement without direction is one of the most dangerous mistakes a lost person can make. Think about this. Every frantic step in the wrong direction takes an ancient human further from camp, further from water, further from safety. Many who died lost in ancient wilderness likely died not from starvation but from the panic that came before it. So what would an experienced ancient human actually do? The very first priority wasn't finding the way home. It was survival within the hour. Shelter, water, warmth. In that order. Let that sink in. An ancient human understood something modern people often forget. You can survive weeks without food, days without water, but only hours in dangerous exposure. If the temperature drops and there's no protection. Think about this. Even in a forest surrounded by trees, a lost human needed to think immediately about the coming night. Fallen branches propped against a tree trunk, thick leaves and brush packed tightly for insulation. A shelter didn't need to be comfortable. It needed to block wind and retain body heat. But wait, building a shelter required tools, and an ancient human caught off guard may have had nothing but a simple knife, or nothing at all. Let that sink in. This is why ancient humans were taught from childhood to always carry basic tools. A blade, a fire-starting kit, cordage made from plant fiber. Not because they expected to get lost, but because they knew, eventually, someone would. Think about this. Preparation wasn't paranoia. It was survival culture passed down through generations who had already learned this lesson the hard way. Once shelter was addressed, the next priority was water. Let that sink in. An ancient human lost in a forest would instinctively move toward lower ground. Water flows downhill. Streams, rivers, and pools tend to collect in valleys, not on ridges. Following the terrain downward often led to a water source faster than wandering randomly. But wait, not all water was safe to drink immediately. Ancient humans developed practical knowledge for this too. Moving water was generally safer than stagnant, still water. Water near green, healthy vegetation was often more reliable than water surrounded by dead or dying plants. Think about this. None of this was guesswork. It was observation, tested and refined by countless people before them, who survived by noticing patterns others ignored. With shelter and water addressed, the next challenge was fire. Let that sink in. Fire meant warmth through the night. It meant protection from predators who avoided flame and smoke. It meant a signal, something that could be seen from a distance by anyone searching. But wait, starting a fire without proper tools, especially in a panicked, exhausted state, was far harder than most people imagine. Think about this. Ancient humans practiced fire starting constantly, not because it was fun, but because a moment of panic was the worst possible time to learn a critical skill for the first time. Muscle memory, built through repetition, could mean the difference between warmth and a freezing, sleepless night. But surviving the physical challenges was only part of the battle. Let that sink in. The mental challenge of being alone was just as dangerous as the physical one. Think about this. Humans are not built for prolonged isolation. For nearly all of human history, survival depended on the group. Shared knowledge, shared protection, shared responsibility. Being suddenly, completely alone, triggered something deep and ancient in the human mind. Fear that wasn't just about danger. It was about disconnection itself. Let that sink in. Some researchers believe this fear of isolation is one of the oldest, most deeply wired survival responses humans carry. Not just fear of predators, fear of being without the group that has always kept you alive. But wait. This fear, uncontrolled, could become dangerous on its own. Think about this. A lost human overwhelmed by fear and isolation might make impulsive decisions, traveling at night despite the danger, ignoring injuries in a desperate rush to find a way back. Let that sink in. Managing fear itself was just as important a survival skill as building a fire or finding water. But wait. Time changes everything. An hour lost is manageable. A full day changes the equation entirely. Think about this. Once night fell without rescue, hunger became a real factor for the first time. Not dangerous yet, but a constant distracting pressure on top of everything else. Let that sink in. Ancient humans lost in unfamiliar terrain had to rely on whatever knowledge they carried about edible plants, insects, and small game. But this carried real risk. Think about this. Misidentifying a poisonous plant while desperate and exhausted could turn a survivable situation into a fatal one. This is likely why ancient education emphasized plant identification so heavily from a young age, not as casual knowledge, but as a skill that could someday mean the difference between life and death. Let that sink in. A mistake made in a moment of hunger and desperation couldn't always be undone, but wait. Food wasn't the only growing danger as time passed. Injury. Think about this. A single sprained ankle on unfamiliar terrain could turn a difficult situation into a potentially fatal one. Without help, without proper treatment, even a minor injury could prevent someone from reaching shelter, water, or safety in time. Let that sink in. Ancient humans lost alone had to move carefully, deliberately, fully aware that a single misstep could end everything. But there was another danger, quieter than hunger, quieter than injury. Predators. Think about this. A lost, exhausted human moving unpredictably through unfamiliar territory was far more vulnerable than a group moving with coordinated awareness. Fatigue slowed reaction time. Fear clouded judgment. Let that sink in. Some ancient humans likely survived encounters with predators not through strength, but through staying still, staying quiet, and controlling the instinct to panic and run. Running often triggered a predator's chase instinct. Stillness, in many cases, offered a better chance of being ignored entirely. But wait, there was one more danger, stranger than all the rest. The mind playing tricks on itself. Think about this. Extended isolation, exhaustion, and fear can distort perception in powerful ways, shapes in the shadows that aren't really there. Sounds that seem closer or farther than they actually are. Let that sink in. Some ancient humans lost for extended periods may have experienced genuine sensory confusion, making an already dangerous situation even harder to navigate safely. This is part of why staying calm mattered so much. A frightened, exhausted mind becomes far less reliable exactly when reliability matters most. So how did ancient humans find their way back at all? Observation. Think about this. The position of the sun during the day. The direction moss tends to grow on certain trees, though never a perfectly reliable method on its own. The direction rivers flowed, often eventually leading toward larger water sources. And larger water sources often meant nearby human settlements. At night, certain stars remained fixed enough to help maintain a consistent direction of travel. Let that sink in. None of these methods were perfect alone, but combined, patiently, over hours or even days, they gave a lost human something priceless, a general sense of direction. But wait, what about the tribe left behind? Think about this. Ancient human groups didn't simply forget someone who failed to return. Search efforts, even primitive ones, likely began quickly. Calling out, following known trails, watching for smoke from a signal fire. Let that sink in. Being lost wasn't just an individual crisis. It was a crisis for the entire group, who understood that losing even one member weakened everyone's chances of survival. So what actually happened to an ancient human lost alone in the forest? Sometimes the story ended in survival, a combination of preparation, calm decision-making, and patient observation, leading them back to camp, exhausted but alive. Other times it didn't. Let that sink in. Archaeological and anthropological evidence suggests that solo deaths in the wilderness were a real and recognized danger throughout ancient human history, not common enough to define daily life, but present enough that every child likely grew up hearing the warning, never wandered too far alone. Think about this. This single fear, being lost, isolated, and vulnerable, may have shaped one of the most important human behaviors of all, the instinct to stay close to the group, to travel in numbers, to value cooperation as a matter of survival, not simply preference. Let that sink in. The story of a single lost human in an ancient forest isn't really about one person's misfortune. It's about why humans, from the very beginning, learned that survival was never meant to be faced alone.